Today we're going to be installing this 2.5-inch MotoFab leveling kit purchased from American Trucks on a 2018 GMC Sierra. It'll fit other year models, I believe all the way down to 07. It's pretty much the same as most trucks. It's just a spacer lift that goes on top of your strut. Right there is where it'll end up. So if you own a different vehicle, you can still watch this video and pretty much apply it to your truck. We're also going to be installing new Bilstein 5100 shocks all the way around it, and Cognito upper control arms. Went ahead and got upper control arms. When you put a leveling kit like this, it kind of puts your front end in a bind. So if you get those, it kind of relaxes everything and gives a more factory ride. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is get your truck jacked up, get it off the ground, and take the tire off. Alright, so the first thing you're going to do once you get your wheel and tire off, you got a couple little brackets hanging on here to support your brake line. Go ahead and take those off. Alright, now you're going to go ahead and loosen up these top strut bolts or nuts. You'll have a little bit of conduit on top of these bolts. You just take a pry bar or something, pop those off. I believe these are either 18 or 19 millimeter. Right there, an 18. Okay, so once you get your upper strut nuts off, we're going to move to the ball joint. There's an 18 millimeter bolt on the bottom of this. Maybe kind of hard to see. Right there is what we're going to be taking off, and then we can bust this ball joint loose. Okay, so now we gotta bust this ball joint loose, and the instructions are gonna say hit the side of this knuckle with a hammer to break it loose. Well, if you've ever done any front end suspension work before, you know that ain't gonna work. You can get a ball joint separator that'll save this boot. I got one from a local parts store. It wasn't big enough for this truck. So we got a ball joint separator here, and how this thing works is you stick it underneath this, and then you beat it with a hammer until that thing pops loose. Now this is going to ruin your upper ball joint, so if you plan on reusing them, this method isn't going to work. Although anytime you do work like this, I recommend going ahead and replacing this upper ball joint. In this build, we're putting on new upper control arms anyways, so they come with new upper ball joints as well. There you have it. Alright, now that we got that off, we need to separate the tie rod in. You're going to have another bolt underneath here. Kind of same thing, except this isn't going to be near as tight. You should be able to just hit it with a dead blow or something and knock that off. 21 millimeter nut. And then we'll hit this out. You don't have threads going all the way to the end. If you work on a different vehicle and you did, you might want to put a piece of wood or something here. Otherwise you'll damage it and you won't be able to get your nut back on. But we ain't got that problem, so we're just going to hit it right on the bottom. And next we'll move to the sway bar linkage. Alright, so taking off this sway bar linkage, you're going to have two, or a 15 millimeter nut and a 15 millimeter on the bottom side. And it is going to want to twist on you, so you're going to have to support it on the top. Okay, now that we got that loose, we can move back to the strut. 2 bolts here. I believe they're 15 millimeter as well. Crawl back underneath here. And now we should be able to pull the strut right out. Okay, so when it goes to putting in your new shocks, you're going to have to disassemble your old strut. Shocks we went with are the Bilstein's 5100s. They are a very popular shock, got great reviews, know a lot of people that run them. I've never ran them myself, so after I put them all the way around the truck, I'll be sure to give a review here in a few weeks. Now in these shocks in particular, you have a circlip here and 4 different grooves. If you have the circlip at the bottom, it's going to ride at stock height. If you want to get up, I believe maybe up to a 2-inch lift is what they claim, you put on this top one. We're going to leave it on the bottom since we're doing the spacer lift, and I'm hoping that'll keep this shock from being stretched out and give it a better ride quality. Alright, so to disassemble this, you're going to need a set of spring collapsers, and you get these nice and tightened up. You want to take a lot of the force out of that spring. The only thing holding this thing together is this 18 millimeter nut up here. So once you got those on, got the tension off, pop that dude off. And your new shocks are going to come with a new nut, but you're going to want to reuse this cap. You get that off, you pull your strut off. And you're also going to reuse this bump stop here. Be sure to hold on to that and the bump stop cover. Okay, to take this guard off here, you can grab a dead blow hammer and just kind of get it off there, because you're also going to reuse this spring seat. And slide it off. Now we'll get our new shock and start reassembling. Okay, now that you got your new shock set up and you start assembling it, first thing is the spring seat adapter. It's going to ride on that circlip. Slide that on there, and then take your original spring seat and put it right on top. And then we have a bump and stop cap. That's going to go on next, and kind of like the one you took off, we're just going to put it on there and then take a dead blow and make sure it's seated all the way. Alright, now you're ready to put your spring back on. Now, when you put on these spacer lifts, it's going to turn your strut 180 degrees. And once you have it all assembled, you can move this bottom piece to align with your lower control arm, but it's a pain. So it's a lot easier to go ahead and get your spring set up how it was on the truck, or 180 degrees of how it was on the truck. Okay, so we'll put the spring back on. I think I remember the orientation. Well, this should be 180 degrees where it was originally. Alright, there. Once you got that on, you put your bump stop back in. Put your cap back on. And these aren't equally spaced, so you'll need to make sure you have the right orientation, because there's some cutouts on this plastic piece that the head of these studs ride in. Alright, once you got that on, you'll take your new nut and put it on the top. Okay, so your new nut's going to be a 15 millimeter, and once you get it on here and it starts getting tight, you'll notice that your stud is going to start spinning. So they have some flat spots on top of here, and you're supposed to use a 6 millimeter wrench, but it kept slipping on me. So I did the other side, so I got a pair of vice grips, and that seemed to work a lot better. Alright, so take your vice grips and grab these flat spots, and then you can hold it as you tighten this up. Alright, now we'll install the actual lift. So it's a spacer lift, so it's just a hunk of metal that sits on top of your strut. This is a 2.5 inch lift. This block isn't actually going to be 2.5 inches. So if you get it in and it's less than 2 inches and it's supposed to be a 2.5 inch lift, when it's all said and done, it will lift the front end of your truck 2.5 inches. So it comes with these studs here. These will act as your new studs. You screw them in to the lift. Then once you got those screwed in, you'll put it on top of the strut and bolt it down, and then you'll be ready to reinstall it on the truck. Okay, now that we got the lift on top of the strut, we're ready to go back in the truck with it. Alright, so now we're ready to replace the upper control arm. Going back with the Cognitos, the ball joint comes separate. I went ahead and put that in on the bench. It's a little easier. It's just 4 little bolts here. The thought behind these is when you put these spacer lifts on, it kind of puts your front end a little bit of a bind. But if you buy a new upper control arm, it'll kind of relax everything and give you a more factory ride. So to do that, you have 2 21 millimeter nuts. Pull those and pull these studs out. And it's important to mark or just remember which one goes where, because they're not the same. The one in the rear goes in the rear, the one in the front goes in the front. Also found these here are for aligning the vehicle, and GM has put some little plastic inserts that are pre-drilled, so when they align it from the factory. So when you go to put these things back on, just go ahead and pop these little plastic pieces out, and then when you take it to get a line, they can align it. Alright, so you don't want to tighten this up yet. One, we got to put everything back together. 2, when you tighten these, you want to have the full weight of the vehicle on it. So once we get all back together, we'll take a jack stand, jack up on this, and then we'll get those tightened. Alright, now we're ready to put our new strut back in. Now, with the spacer on here, it's going to be a little difficult. It's not going to bolt right up. So what you want to do is stab it in the top and maybe just put one nut on it, and then get your bottom bolts started, and then put your other 2 nuts on, and then you can kind of suck it all together. Okay, so remember how I said this will turn, so try to get this will turn but not easily. Try to get it as lined best you can. Well, looks like I got mine a little off, so I'm going to grab a cheater pipe and put it on this ear here and see if I can't twist it around where it's supposed to be. Alright, it looks like I had the camera off, tightening this thing up, but you didn't miss much. I got that bent around where it went in straight. Got my bolts in, got them started, got everything started, then just kind of sucked it all together. Now that that's done, we're going to move on to the upper ball joint. Now Cognito's upper ball joints have a little bigger thread size than OEM. I measured out to like 540 thousandths, so slightly bigger than 1/2 inch, and you only got a 1/2 inch hole to go into. So you're going to have to drill it out. I don't have anything bigger than a 1/2 inch drill bit, so I'm just going to kind of ream it out with this thing until my ball joint will slip down in there. Alright, we got everything put back together. To get that ball joint to go in, I had to take the jack and lift up on my lower control arm, put some weight on it. Got that in. Then if you look around the corner, that castle nut there, you can see it. The new ones come with the castle nut, so put that on there, and then you'll have a little cotter pin that you slide through the grooves. There's a hole in the bolt, and then just bend your tab over. That's just to keep it from coming out. So now that that's done, it's just putting it all back together just like we took it apart. The only difference is your sway bar linkage here. You're not going to want to install that until you have the other side complete as well. So do the other side and put it all together and put on your sway bar linkage, and we'll be ready to put wheels and tires on. Alright, so we got her all buttoned up. One little note I want to share is your ABS line right here. Once you get everything tied together, it's going to be too tight on this section. So this little plastic piece used to hook to here. All you want to do is take it off, run it up there. It's still contained, everything, so no problems there. Also, don't forget the electrical conduit that you took off these upper strut bolts that had them little plastic caps on your studs. Your new studs aren't long enough to put them back on, so just make sure they're tied up somehow. I use a few zip ties, tied them with some other conduit in there. The reason you want to do that is your exhaust manifold is right behind you. That little silver piece there is a heat shield, but you know, it's still going to get pretty hot. Just make sure nothing's touching that. Now, some comments I have about after doing all this. My upper control arm, I have the adjustment almost all the way out, and I'm touching my bump stops. Even when I take the jack and put all the vehicle weight on this strut, it's still touching. There's that, and then when the weight is off like it is now, you can see that the upper control arm is just barely touching that spring. Now this issue is only on the passenger side. Touching the bump stops is on both sides. So I'm hoping that once this wears in, you know, we do have brand new shock on there. Maybe it'll wear and come off them bump stops. I definitely don't want to cut them off, and I definitely don't recommend doing that. I've done some research online. Seems like the only people that have this problem is with much bigger lifts, like real lift kits, not just a leveling kit. So we'll see what it does. We'll get a good alignment on it. If it continues and rides bad, I'll see what to do then. But a lot of people run this setup as far as I can tell and haven't had any issues, so we'll go from there. So now it's time to put wheels and tires on. I went with the Fuel Rebels, the dark gray color, 20 inches. They're wrapped in Toyo AT3s. I believe, let's see here, they're a 275/60R20. So once I get those put on, I'll show you how it looks and measure the lift height and see what kind of lift we got out of this thing. So before we put the wheels and tires on, I forgot to mention, I did come across one issue with my install. It's my fault. Don't be like me. Read the instructions before you do stuff like this. Thought I knew how this thing went together, but I was wrong. In my video earlier, you can see that the upper ball joint, the base of this thing, was mounted on top of the upper control arm. Looking back, that was wrong. It's supposed to be mounted on the bottom. So I had to tear it all back apart, not the whole thing, just had to bust this off and swap it around and put it on correctly. So if you look, that is how it's supposed to be installed. If you noticed in the video earlier, you could see the silver mounting plate on top, and I was having trouble putting together the driver's side, and that's when I went and looked at the manual and realized how it's actually supposed to be installed. So I think it's fair to talk about things like that when you have issues. You know, you watch these videos and no one ever has a problem, and you know, everything comes apart good and goes back together good. So I just want to tell you all about that and make sure if you put on these upper control arms, you don't make that mistake as well. Alright, so we got the wheels and tires on the front. Time to move to the back. I've already put on one shock. So same in the back, Bilstein 5100s. This is a lot easier install because you don't have a strut to rebuild, obviously. It's only 2 bolts, 21 millimeter. When you install these, they'll be a little backwards from your OEM shocks. So it's going to look upside down compared to them, just where the shock boot cover is. But you just want the Bilstein logo to be upright, and then you know you're installing it correctly. So show y'all what to do on that. Crawl under here, you got a bolt and a nut on the bottom side. And then, it may be hard to see, then you just got a bolt up there. That nut's pressed in. It doesn't look to be tack welded, but you only got to worry about taking the bolt out. Here you'll have a nut though, so bolt on that side, nut on that side. So you'll have to support it. It'll try to spin on you. And when you're done installing it, it'll look like that. Ain't nothing to it. Pull that bottom bolt out, and then take the top bolt out. I pulled the bottom bolt out and tried to get the bolt out first. I had to take a jack to kind of get it where I needed to be so it came out easily, but on this next one I'm just gonna take them both out and then it should come right out. As far as putting in the new one, they're pretty easy to push, but same thing, I jacked the truck up and got the tire off the ground. That way it's only like ½ an inch from going in, and once I did that I was able to just push on it up enough to slide that bolt in and tighten it up. Alright, so we got both rear shocks installed now. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is make sure you get both bolts put in before you start tightening anything up. On the other side, that was my second side I put in. It was definitely a lot easier to take a bunch of weight off the vehicle before trying to put that last bolt in. Alright, so here it is, everything installed. Took some measurements on the fender wells. The backs are both about 40 inches. One on the front is 40 inches, the other's 39.5. Last night they were both at 40.5. So as everything settles in, it should get more level. Before, I had 3 inches of rake on the truck, so 2.5 inch lift. They should both settle to about 39.5, and that should be right. Give it a couple days, and then after alignment, we'll see how she looks. But it looks a lot better having that 3 inches of rake and them little wheels and tires on there. My upper control arms, I mentioned having concerns before. They now have at least a ½ inch of gap, so no worries there. And once we got everything on the ground, it lined out like it should. Tires, full lock both ways, have, I'd say, probably a ½ inch of clearance from touching the fender well, so shouldn't have any problems with rubbing. And there you have it. Thanks for watching.